Our next act is Ralph Kusserow. It says comments from a career in pastoral ministry, but he told me they're interesting experiences from his career in pastoral ministry. You know, he's lived, little known that, 14 years in Malaysia and Singapore. The longest place he lived in was Tanzania for 10 years.
Ow.
He doesn't look that old. Anyway, let's hear it for Kusserow. Ralph.
I was surprised that Joel was kind of surprised that there were so many people here today. Joel, the reason they came was they heard I was speaking. At any rate, as he said, I'm a retired pastor. I want to share some interesting experiences that I have had as a pastor in the parish ministry. One Sunday morning, two little girls came to me and they said, "Pastor, we found $1." I thought I'd have fun with them, so I said, "Well, tell me, is it green?" And he looked, I said, yes, it's green. I said, "Well, is there a big number 1 on it?" And he looked, they said, yes, there's a big number 1 on it. I said, "Is there a picture of George Washington on it?" He said, yes, there's a picture of George Washington on it. I said, "Well, it must be mine because I lost it just a few minutes ago." One of the little girls looked up to me and said, "Pastor, in the ladies' room?" One Sunday morning when I was preaching, one of the men fell asleep and started snoring. And unfortunately, he was sitting up front by himself and there was nobody close enough to sort of poke him and wake him up. The snoring got louder and louder, and so finally I stopped preaching and I looked at one of the other men. I said, "Would you please go over and wake him up?" He looked up at me and said, "No, you come down and wake him up. After all, you're the one who put him to sleep." One Sunday while I was preaching, all of a sudden I remembered I had forgotten an announcement. We had a bit of a problem and they wanted the board to meet and deal with that kind of quickly. So we were supposed to have a meeting right after church. So as soon as the sermon was over, I said, "I'm sorry, I forgot to make a very important announcement. There's going to be a meeting of the board right after church in the meeting room." And so after church, I got my robe off and went to the meeting room. Interestingly, the first person who came was someone I didn't even recognize. He was a visitor that day. I said, "I'm sorry, you misunderstood. This is a meeting of the board." He said, "No, that's exactly why I'm here."
If anybody was more bored than I was with someone, then I'd like to meet it.
My wife and I raised 3 little boys, and one day one of them said to me, "Daddy, when you preach, you go into the pulpit, and then you just stand there for a moment and don't say anything. Then you start preaching. Why do you do that?" I said, "Well, I asked God to help me preach a good sermon." He looked up at me and said, "Daddy, why doesn't he do it?" One day I dreamt I was preaching. When I woke up, I was. My sermon was so boring, I had put myself to sleep. And so I don't put all of you to sleep. I'm going to quit here. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ralph.